Hey there everybody, Matthew Reilly here. You know what's better than fan club questions? More fan club questions. The Facebook fan club has sent me a whole new bunch of questions, so without any further ado, let me get into them. I'll try to be brief because there's a lot to get through. What happened to book 2? He disappeared after Scarecrow and was never mentioned again. Book 2 lived happily ever after. Now the thing about a Scarecrow book, which I've thought about a lot, is actually about who is the team with Scarecrow. In Ice Station it was his Marines. In Area 7 he's with the presidential crew. In Scarecrow and the Army of Thieves, he's actually with a group of academics up in the Arctic. So there was no real place for Book 2 in that book. If Scarecrow does return, Book 2 may well come back. But for now, let's say he lived happily ever after. Will there be a signing tour or appearances in America anytime soon? Would love to meet you, but can't travel to different countries. Not sure. Usually these things are done with the publishers. I've done 2 full US tours in the past, but that will be up to my US publisher. So at the moment, I would say not really, but unless I do something myself, which I might. Where is somewhere you have not been yet that you plan to visit to put in a book? Norway, Sweden, or maybe above them, Svalbard. I find Svalbard very interesting. At what stage of the book do you realize that you want to turn it into a series versus a standalone novel? Is it at the start before you even start writing, or are there some books that only turn into a series midway through publishing or even after the release? Usually it comes after writing the book. When I wrote Ice Station, I was just trying to write that book. I enjoyed writing about Scarecrow and Mother and the gang so much, I wrote Area 7. It was the same with Seven Ancient Wonders. Seven Ancient Wonders is, when you look at it closely, a standalone book. But I enjoyed writing about Jack West and his sort of more family-oriented team and all the ancient places. And so then I said, this has a series in it. And then I wrote The Six Sacred Stones. And because I did 7, 6, 5, suddenly I was committed to doing 4, 3, 2, 1. So I inadvertently committed myself to writing a 7-book series. I still don't quite know how I managed to write 7 books in one series. Sometimes a standalone, though, it just lives by itself. Contest, I don't think I could do a sequel to Contest, even though I've thought about it. But I think there's another question about that later. Have you ever considered a female character equal to Jack or Scarecrow to put in a book series? Sort of goes along with the previous question that I have done obviously books with female leads, but Bess in The Tournament, Sky Rogers in The Secret Runners of New York, obviously Hannah Fisher in Mr. Einstein's Secretary. Having finished those books, would I want to bring that heroine back in the same way that I did with Jack West? Believe it or not, I did start working on a potential sequel to The Tournament, and I may yet do that in the future. So that would bring back Bess. Mr. Einstein's Secretary, I think, is a oneer. It's a standalone. I don't think there's any room for a follow-up story for Hannah. And Secret Runners of New York, I did contemplate a sequel. There is a little Easter egg in there that I call a trapdoor for a sequel. It involves Denver Airport. Also, obviously, there's Interceptor, my movie, which had a female lead in Captain J.J. Collins. I did actually write a full sequel to Interceptor, but Netflix said they weren't really interested in doing sequels, and they tend not to do them. So I fashioned that into another story with a brand new hero. Will there be a sequel to The Great Zoo of China, as it was left a bit open and that hinted at a possible return? It would be a great little treat to follow up with some sort of Black Ops conspiracy to steal the surviving dragons. Again, The Great Zoo of China, I don't think I can do anything more with that. I left everything on the field with that book. That is the biggest bonkers rampage of a monster movie on paper that I could come up with. I don't think I could do any better than I did with that. So sadly, probably there won't be a sequel to The Great Zoo of China. There was another female lead, CJ. If you could remake any classic movie, what would it be? Capricorn 1. I think Capricorn 1 is largely responsible for people thinking the moon landing was faked. It's a wonderful 70s movie about faking man's first mission to Mars. I would remake that in a heartbeat because I think more people should know about it. Do you think there will be a sequel or prequel to The Secret Runners of New York? This book haunts me and I want to know more about the gems. As I said, there's a trapdoor in The Secret Runners of New York for a sequel. I'm talking to some people about doing a television show based on it. So maybe it would be in a second season. I mean, hey, if we get to first season, that's great. But yeah, there is an idea there. In The Five Greatest Warriors, the scene where Zoe and Lily meet Kieran Kincaid, Zoe's quiet distress at having to interact with her abuser in front of Lily comes across as viscerally real. What made you come up with that storyline in general, and how did you get that scene to feel so authentic? Yeah, this was a hard one. Um, Writing a book is a bit like being an actor. You want to get into character when you're writing these scenes. And I wanted Kieran just to be this utterly despicable character who unfortunately has risen upwards. And so then I just really put myself into Zoe's head and try to find the words. And so maybe the best way to answer this question is when I'm writing, I always know when it's not quite right. And then I will find the correct words. And sometimes it's a word that you don't necessarily come up with first and you come back to it months later. I'm glad the scene impacted you in that way because that's how it was supposed to make you feel. The scene in The One Impossible Labyrinth where Lily gives a verbal lashing to Jack when he wants to give up echoes to the famous scene in Scarecrow with Scarecrow and Mother fighting in the rain. Was that parallel deliberate? No, the parallel wasn't deliberate, but I think it shows my evolving view of dealing with my heroes. And something that, especially say the heroes in the series, Scarecrow and Jack West, there is a point where they have to say to themselves, does anybody care what I am doing? And they need a friend like Mother or a daughter figure like Lily to smack them upside the head and say, you're better than this, you have to do this. So it wasn't deliberate, but I think it showed that with two heroes who are guys who save the world, occasionally when they start to falter, they need a good friend to give them an honest opinion. Kind of helps for a writer as well. Music while writing, yes or no? No, I have no music on when I'm writing. Then the next question was, if yes, would you consider adding a music playlist to your book notes? Well, the answer is no, so no. Regarding the Jack West series, is there a particular reason that both the Adamson twins had to die? Spoiler alert. Was it a difficulty in writing them interestingly dynamic, or I just really needed the readers to hate the bad guys thing, or something else entirely? It was actually something else entirely. I had always planned to kill off one of them. But when you kill off a character, there is one rule that I have, and that the death of a character has to fundamentally impact the other characters. If you're just killing off characters willy-nilly, and there's a great example, in the finale of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which is a few years ago now, there was one character who just got killed off like that. No reason, not seen by any other characters, not mourned by any of the other characters. It was odd for a show as good as Buffy was that this character was just thrown away in the finale. Now, Game of Thrones did it a much better way until the final season, but let's forget that. Game of Thrones, every character death just hit you and it hit the other characters hard. So, when the first Adamson twin dies, the impact on his other twin is profound. And that's where the second one goes in, just blank-faced. He is going in to die. And this is where certain characters do have to die. I have to remind the reader that not everybody is safe. But having famously killed off characters, and spoiler alert, the killing off of Gant in Scarecrow has reverberated for years. It's been 22 years since I did that, and it still annoys people. But it had such a profound effect on Scarecrow and on readers by extension that it was successful. Same with the deaths of the characters throughout the Jack West series, and I won't spoil it for those because there are other characters who died. But killing off one twin was to show that not everybody's safe. Killing off the second showed how profoundly impactful that first death was. And then this same questioner says, they haven't forgiven me for the killing of Gant, yada, yada, yada. I did kill Gant, and I'll live with that for the rest of my life. And, the fact that it still reverberates 22 years later is kind of great. People don't expect to cry when they read a Matthew Reilly book, but people cried when they read Scarecrow to this day. Okay. Next question. Any more books coming from the female perspective? Great Zoo, Einstein, even Tournament. You write well as a woman. Woohoo, thanks. And a great way to introduce more girls to your genre. I'm also going to add Interceptor, not a book, but awesome. Yes, I will probably write some more books from the female perspective. My book coming later this year, end of 2025, is not a female perspective, but is a very, very different perspective. Stay tuned for that. Next question. I'm still wondering what happened to Kevin after the end scene of Area 7. Kevin being the genetically engineered little boy in the middle of all the action in Area 7. Kevin lived happily ever after. Where he went, I don't know. But this is a really good jumping off point for me to do a little rant on living happily ever after. Let's have a think about the end of Return of the Jedi. At the end of Return of the Jedi, everybody lived happily ever after. But then when Star Wars decided to make the final trilogy, episodes 7, 8, 9, Han and Leia are now broken up. They're estranged. Their son has become a emo Darth Vader fanboy, and they're generally miserable. They didn't live happily ever after. Let's look at Indiana Jones. At the end of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, he literally rode off into the sunset with his dad. He was going off to live happily ever after. By this last Indiana Jones movie, Dial of Destiny, he's a cranky old man living in an apartment in New York. I think it's okay for characters to live happily ever after. I know we live in a corporatized Hollywood, and this is something I deal with on a weekly basis living here in Los Angeles. But sometimes you got to let these characters live happily ever after. I know it might seem like a good money grab, but no, sometimes the story just ends and you have to let it end. Sometimes I'm really impressed by any filmmakers who go, this is done. Let's not do any sequels. What comes first, a character or a story idea? Does inspiration strike like a picture or a line comes to you to build from, or do you have to sit and consciously create from a blank slate? Okay, writing question, ideas question. I am always reading. I'm always reading the newspaper. I'm always reading history books, non-fiction books. I'm always filling my brain with ideas. How they turn into a book is a mysterious thing. You don't just sit on the beach and look at the sky and go, oh, there's an idea. Best example, the Tournament. So the Tournament, I had been reading about Queen Elizabeth I, Henry VIII, the Islamic Empire, all sorts of things about history. And then I read this book about junior chess tournaments and how parents at junior chess tournaments cheat. And I said to myself, when was the first chess tournament ever? And I looked it up and it was in the 1800s and that didn't interest me. And then I said, well, what if there was a chess tournament that was lost to history? And maybe the Sultan of the Islamic Empire hosted it. And so I looked up the peak of the Islamic Empire, Suleiman the Magnificent, and suddenly, and this happened in one day, it's the only book this has ever happened with, one day I sat down and I mapped out the whole story of the tournament, and it was picking from all this stuff I'd read about Elizabeth I, Henry VIII, Suleiman the Magnificent, Ivan the Terrible, Michelangelo, and chess. And suddenly I had the bones of this story. So where do the ideas come from? It comes from some spark. Reading that chess book made me say, well, what if there was a chess tournament that had been lost to history? I do get the ideas first, usually, and then I populate the idea with characters. Now, maybe other authors do it differently, but for me, generally, it's the story and the plot first. Ice Station's another good example. What if you discovered something made of metal buried deep beneath the ice under an ice station in Antarctica? And it's in a layer of 100 million year old ice. The answer? You'd send in your troops to go and protect the station and try and grab what it was. Unfortunately, other countries would send in their troops. Then I said, well, who would be the American troops? I come up with Scarecrow and Mother and the Marines at the center of the story. So for me, it's plot first, characters next. With the rise of AI-generated film, could you see yourself creating your adventures in the future this way? No limit with budget for big set pieces, so you can go all out on it as your work deserves. Hey, thanks. Yes, I think at the moment it's still very early. I have tried a few things with AI, but at the moment it's sort of like drawing something with crayons while wearing boxing gloves. You're sort of pushing it around like that. Once it becomes more precise, oh yeah, I think we'll be able to do some amazing things photorealistically, motion, and we'll be able to do it affordably. And finally, here's the last question. Will there ever be a prequel or sequel to Contest? My all-time favorite because it made me wait for you to write more. So, see above about Happily Ever After. I loved writing Contest. I did toy for a time about writing a sequel, that it does have to be restaged. And so I thought the restaging of the Presidian would involve teams from different planets, thus enlarging the story. But I ultimately came to the view with Contest, like Temple, like Great Zoo of China, I just don't think I can do any better. I left it all on the table with Contest, and I don't want to ruin the memory of the first one by writing an inferior sequel. Prequels are not really my thing, and I really have an issue with prequels because you kind of know that the hero is going to survive. And to me, with a thriller, it's all about, will the hero survive or heroine survive? So for that, I probably will never do a prequel. But no, with Contest, as I said above, sometimes you got to let these characters live happily ever after, and I've got to practice what I preach. And so with Contest, no, I have no plans to do a prequel or sequel. That's the last question. So I am planning to do one more thing. I'd like to do a video series, and I think I figured out what it's going to be. And stay tuned, because I'm going to put it up on my YouTube channel, and I'm going to do a series about writing. And a lot of you know this, the self-published edition of Contest. You know, they sell for thousands of dollars on eBay and at charity auctions. But few of you, actually none of you, will have seen this. This is one of the original manuscripts of Contest, printed on a dot matrix printer in September of 1994. I'm going to tell you in a new video piece how I set about writing Contest, self-publishing it, and what happened with it afterwards. So they are some more fan questions. Stay tuned for my next video piece, which will be about my first novel. Thanks a lot. Happy reading.